Hello, and welcome to How to Implement Ottawa's Safe Sport Toolkit. This webinar is for club administrators. So, as you can see from our agenda, we're going to cover the following topics, which will all focus on helping you understand what you need to do to implement Safe Sport. So we'll begin with a very short welcome and a little bit of background, followed by an explanation of Ottawa Sport Council's approach. And then the majority of the webinar will really be spent walking you through the elements of Ottawa's Safe Sport Toolkit. So this toolkit is made up of 4 elements, which you can implement at your convenience. So please have your Ottawa Safe Sport Toolkit implementation guide handy so you can follow along. If you don't have it, please pause this webinar now and download a copy by clicking on the link, which is OttawaSafeSportToolkit.ca. So just a bit about sport law. We've been around for almost 30 years, and we're a group of lawyers and other experts who work with all levels of sport organizations in Canada in areas such as leadership development, legal matters, and governance. So sport law has been working with the Ottawa sport community on their Safe Sport Toolkit over the past year. A little bit about me and my areas of expertise. Most of my work focuses on safe sport implementation, strategic planning, and other facilitation.
And hello, my name is Melissa Knox, and my work in this area on this project revolves around the Safe Sport Policy Suite.
So the Ottawa Sport Council and its member associations have been on quite a journey over the past year, and we have been honored to be part of that. So they wanted to really clearly determine a path forward to safe sport, and this webinar will explain what was developed and how you can implement it. And I really want to emphasize again that you can use as much or as little of this toolkit as you want. These are leading practices that we're providing based on the priorities that you and others identified. So just to ensure we're all on the same page when we talk about safe sport can be defined as physical and emotional safety, which includes concussion and injury prevention, and environments free from bullying, abuse, harassment, discrimination, and other forms of maltreatment. You cannot have safe sport without equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm going to give you a little background about Ottawa's approach. The Ottawa Sport Council wanted to ensure any decisions about safe sport were made with consultation with its member organizations. So several workshops were held and a working group was struck to identify the strengths and gaps within Ottawa's safe sport system, identify reasonable and realistic approaches they could take to improve the physical and emotional safety of all stakeholders, including athletes and coaches, and come to consensus on Ottawa's Safe Sport Toolkit elements. So all parts of the toolkit were created based on the priorities that were identified by all those involved. During Ottawa's Safe Sport workshop, participants agreed on the following safe sport goal: a collaborative and harmonious approach to fostering safe, welcoming, and inclusive sport environments collectively. So participants at the workshop also identified 4 elements of Ottawa's Safe Sport Toolkit: policies, training requirements, engagement, and resources. So these are the toolkit elements that are also represented by a drawer or a box on the website. So each of these elements and their recommended priorities were developed based on the feedback from representatives from the Ottawa sport community, including administrators and athletes and coaches. And I'll describe in detail each one as we go through them. So as you follow along in your Safe Sport implementation guide, you will see the links to all your important documents and a checklist next to each task. So we're going to start at the framework section, which is after the overview and the how to use this guide section. So the framework really represents the overall toolkit. And you'll see a heading called Framework Implementation. So these are the steps to follow as you get started in the implementation of the overall toolkit. So begin by reviewing the framework and each of the framework elements. As I mentioned, the elements are essentially the drawers of the toolkit, and we'll be going through each of these elements today. Then read through the implementation guide and all related documents. Hopefully you're following along in your implementation guide today. Save a generic copy of the implementation guide in your organization's SafeSport files so you have it for future reference. Also save a dated copy of the implementation guide with today's date and use that checklist to track your completion of each element this year. If you have any questions or concerns, contact Ottawa Sport Council staff. And it's important for you to repeat this checklist annually to keep on top of Safe Sport, which has been an evolving topic over the last few years. So this is the first element of the Safe Sport Toolkit, policies. The intention of the policy element is for the Ottawa sport community to have access to and follow the same safe sport policies so that everyone throughout the community has the same policy templates to ensure consistency and quality. And this is the hardest part. So we have lots of resources to support you. So Ottawa's Safe Sport Policy Suite is a legal document made up of 12 policy templates, including a code of conduct and a screening policy, and many others that your organization can customize. So we have 2 webinars to help you sort through this element. This one and another one called Safe Sport Policy Activation, which will be in November to help answer your questions about the policies. Safe Sport Policy 101 is made up of a number of resources to help you and everyone involved with your club, including athletes, understand your policies. It includes a short video that explains why there are 12 policies and provides some details about some of the key policies and how they affect you and others. The Safe Sport Policy Suite summary sheet gives an overview of all 12 policies, so you're aware of the intent of each policy. And then there are 5 different code of conduct checklists, one for athletes, one for coaches, one for directors and staff, one for officials, and one for parents, guardians, and spectators. So these are all aligned with the code of conduct and ethics policy, and they are actual checklists that need to be filled out and signed, which helps ensure that all of these stakeholders know what it's expected of them. And then finally, there are 2 tip sheets, Safe Sport Tips for athletes and Safe Sport Tips for coaches. And these really focus on the rule of 2 and what's okay and not okay in terms of coach-athlete relationships. So lots of resources, and let's talk about what you do with them. So you'll find these steps in the policy implementation section of your implementation guide. If you haven't already done so, watch the Safe Sport Policy 101 video and check out the other Policy 101 resources that I just mentioned so you understand what is available to support you. Participate in or watch the Safe Sport Policy Activation webinar, which will be happening in November, to get your questions answered about all the policies. If you haven't already done so, read through the policy templates before the policy activation webinar. Create your own Safe Sport Policy Suite using Ottawa's policy templates. You will need to contact the Ottawa Sport Council for a Word version of the templates. You can customize your policy without changing the intent of the policy. Check to see if any of the changes are needed and pay special attention to the screening policy and its screening and training matrix as an appendix. We'll touch more on this again in the next section. Ensure you review the code of conduct and ethics and the related code of conduct checklists. The code of conduct checklists replicate what's in the code of conduct to help ensure everyone reads it and understands it. And of course, check all the other policies too. So when you're adapting them, put your organization's name on them. When you're creating this version, make sure you refer to your organization by name either throughout the document or in the definitions section. To adopt your customized policies, submit a motion for your organization's board of directors to approve them if that's required. And once your policies have been approved, communicate them to all those affected by the policies. Post them on your website and social media and send out notice through email and provide a contact for questions. Share your screening and training matrix to ensure your requirements are now known and met by everyone. Send your code of conduct and ethics and those checklists to all the stakeholders I mentioned in the previous slide. You can make it part of your registration process and attach any new requirements with a deadline for returning the forms. Send the Safe Sport tips to all your athletes and all your coaches and let them know that they're based on your policies. And then use the engagement element, which we'll get to shortly, to discuss policy questions that any of your members may have and to explain the rationale for the policies. And then repeat annually. Your policies won't change that often, but it's always good to check with the Ottawa Sport Council or policy experts to see if there have been any major updates. So training requirements. This element ensures everyone understands their role in creating safe and thriving sport environments. That's why minimum standards have been recommended across the community to ensure consistency. The intention of the training requirements element is that all members of the Ottawa sport community will promote minimum training standards for all stakeholders. The screening and training matrix, which is part of the screening policy, is a good starting point for your requirements. It includes CAC's free safe sport training for all your stakeholders. Other training recommendations that are included as part of the toolkit are the Athlete and Coach Safe Sport Expectations webinar, which helps explain behavior expectations for both athletes and coaches based on the policies. It's important that you've implemented the policies before having your athletes and coaches do the webinar. This webinar will be available in January of 2022. And then finally, the guidelines for a cycle of continuous improvement, which focuses on monitoring and providing some accountability for each of the toolkit elements. This is really an opportunity for each organization to reflect on the impact of the changes that it makes and see what's working and what needs to improve. So you'll find this screening and training matrix in the screening policy, which is part of the Safe Sport Policy Suite. It outlines the roles people play and their level of risk so you can identify their training and screening requirements. Again, this is a starting point. You can adapt it, but keep in mind this really helps mitigate your own risk to your organization by having these screening and training requirements in place. We'll go through this in more detail during the policy activation webinar. So to implement this element of the toolkit, here are the steps to follow. Once the screening policy has been adopted by your organization, send the training and screening requirements to all stakeholders, including current or potential coaches. Post any required or recommended training, including CAC's Safe Sport training, on your organization's website, social media, and any other place that your organization communicates digitally. Create a tracking system to track coach training and screening completion. Your sport organization may be able to work with your national sport organization, your NSO, or the CAC might be able to help you track completion of training requirements. Send the link to CAC's training to all stakeholders, including athletes, coaches, parents, administrators, officials, and volunteers, with instructions to complete it and then track their completion. Watch and then share the Athlete and Coach Safe Sport Expectations webinars, which will be available in late January of 2022, and then send to your stakeholders and track their completion if you can. Read the guidelines for continuous improvement and implement accordingly so you know whether or not your changes are making a difference. Post and/or send any other training links or resources that are important to your organization to create a safe and thriving sport environment. And repeat these steps annually. So engagement is the third element of the Safe Sport Toolkit. Intentional engagement with athletes, coaches, and others is critical. Their lived experience provides a firsthand assessment of how well your policies and training are working on the ground. So communication is important, but it's only a one-way path to your stakeholders, including your athletes and coaches. Engagement creates a two-way conversation, and it's crucial to help you understand if your implementation methods are working. Engagement is also a highly effective risk mitigation strategy. The intention of the engagement element is that the Ottawa sport community will consistently and intentionally engage with all stakeholders, including athletes, to get meaningful feedback. Some key priorities that were identified were to provide some debrief tips. So there are 2 debrief documents to use following the Athlete and Coach Safe Sport Expectations webinar. One is for administrators to ensure coaches are clear on their expectations, and another is for the coaches to allow them to engage with their athletes so everyone is clear on safe sport expectations. There are tips and prompts to help guide the conversation. Rule of 2. Pilots identified they wanted tips and leading practices aligned with the rule of 2. As mentioned earlier in the policy element, we have developed safe sport tips for athletes and safe sport tips for coaches that focus on the rule of 2 and what's okay, not okay in terms of coach-athlete relationships. CAC has led the rule of 2 movement, so we have provided some key links from them to help implement the rule of 2. There is also it's really an evolving area, so you can check with them if you need clarification on any aspect of the rule of 2. And then the final priority was for organizations to leverage or develop their vision, mission, and values to align with safe sport. So this can help to bring your safe sport message to life and also remind everyone about your vision, mission, and values. So how do you intentionally engage? Here's your checklist. Start with some background. So read the Safe Sport Debrief tips for administrators and the Safe Sport Debrief tips for coaches so you know what is available to support you in your engagement process. Read the CAC's tips and leading practices connected to the rule of 2, again, so you know what's available to support you in implementing and discussing rule of 2. Then create your communication and engagement protocol that outlines how you will communicate and engage with each of your stakeholders, including athletes, on a regular basis. You could use interactive methods such as conference calls or Zoom meetings, in-person meetings or town halls, surveys, councils or committees, or anything else that you think would be effective. Your protocol could include annual opportunities for engagement, such as preseason expectation meetings to clarify expectations, in-season check-ins to see how everything's going, and post-season feedback sessions to see what could improve. Share your rule of 2 leading practices from CAC and the Safe Sport tips to clarify what's okay, not okay, according to your policies. Hold a virtual or in-person meeting following the Athlete and Coach Safe Sport Expectations webinar to address any questions or concerns, and use the Safe Sport Debrief tips for administrators to create an agenda and guide the discussion. Encourage coaches to hold a similar meeting with their athletes to address any questions or concerns, and advise the coaches to use their Safe Sport Debrief tips for coaches to create an agenda and guide their discussion. Both meetings can also make use of other resources such as the Safe Sport tips for athletes and coaches to clarify questions and concerns around the rule of 2. Very importantly, follow up on areas of concern that get brought up at either meeting and make a plan to address these with other administrators or anybody else who is connected to the process. If you already have a strategic plan outlining your organization's vision, mission, and values, look at how you can align and leverage your strategic directions with your safe sport priorities and messages. If you do not have a strategic plan, look at developing one and align your safe sport priorities and messages within it. Use your organization's social media accounts to engage with stakeholders and to give specific key messages about safe sport to targeted audiences. And before the season starts, ideally, set up channels for virtual, phone, and in-person connections, such as video or audio conference accounts or in-person meeting space to allow easy interactions at all levels of your organization. And then finally, repeat all of these steps annually. Our final element is resources. So there are many safe sport resources that are available across the country to advance knowledge and awareness, and we've listed some of those leading practices on a following slide. The intention of the resources element is to provide the Ottawa community sport organizations with access to easy to use resources that promote a safe sport environment. There are specific resources called Toolkit assets, many of which we've already discussed, which have been customized to suit the needs of the Ottawa sport community. And we'll list those on a following slide. In terms of implementing this element, post and or send the link to the toolkit and or other resources to all relevant stakeholders. Create a method for stakeholders to submit enhanced resources from other organizations on leading practices or innovative thinking in safe sport that you can share with your members. Post all enhanced resources and links to related organizations such as CAC on your organization's website and or your social media accounts. And finally, repeat annually. So we've already discussed all of these customized resources that the Ottawa Sport Council has created to support you in your Safe Sport Toolkit. You can download them and share them as we've discussed in the earlier sections. All you have to do is click on the index in the main menu, which will bring up the link to all the toolkit assets. These are some of the resources and leading practices across the country that align with safe sport. Take advantage of all the expertise that's available in these areas. So hope you feel ready to implement your Safe Sport Toolkit. If you have any questions or concerns about anything you've heard in this webinar about implementing your Safe Sport Toolkit, our contact information is available. So thank you for your attention.